Well, hello, Tim Crosby here, and today's topic, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, because it's a fundamental topic, and I call this the shapes of G. So we'll start with my own history of an open G chord when I first started to learn how to play the guitar, as many of you might have, with the famous Mel Bay book. And he showed us how to make a G chord this way, with ring finger on the third fret of the first string, pointer finger on the second fret of the fifth string, and middle finger over here on the sixth string at the third fret for that open G. Gives you a nice hand position, nice and round, and we can talk about some of the details of it later. So I thought, okay, I know how to play G, and then I learned other chords. And then I started hanging around with some bluegrass players, and I noticed that the guitar players that I admired fingered it differently. They put their pinky finger on the first string, and their middle finger on the fifth string at the second fret, and their ring finger over here on the sixth string. Makes the same chord, but it's a little trickier at first to get that stretch between that ring finger and that pinky. But thought, okay, now I know how the big boys do it, and I'm going to play my G that way. And later on, then I saw other guitar players whom I admired, many of them bluegrass players, and many of them contemporary players, that fingered it yet another way. Yes, they had their pinky here on the fifth or the first string, and then they put their ring finger on the second string at the fifth or at the third fret, then back to middle finger over here on the sixth string, pointer finger on the fifth string, and it has a little bit different voice. So what's that? 1, 2, 3 ways to play it. There might be some other ways, but these are the most important. And you might think, well, which one is the correct way? Which one's the right way to do it? And the answer is they all are, because which way you choose to finger your G chord has to do with either where you're coming from, what chord you're coming from, or what chord you're going to next. So this one, good all-purpose, get you into playing that G chord. But one of the disadvantages, oftentimes there's a C chord next to the G chord, which means you have to change your hand angle, your elbow angle to move around here to get a C. D, you have to pick them all up, reorganize. D7 is a little bit easier because then you can have this pivot finger, you can just slide that back and drop these guys down for a D7. So that's an advantage of this way of fingering D, and I often use this at first to talk about the concept of pivot fingers, which you might find a whole discussion of later, but I won't go into it now. So this has advantages, D7 being a particular advantage, but it has some disadvantages. One of them is the C chord. That's where this pinky, ring finger, middle finger shape comes in, because if you notice, you almost can't tell when I switch from that one to the C chord, because your hand shape, your whole angle of your wrist and your arm, your thumb, everything remains the same. It also, this has the advantage of giving you two fingers that you can play melodies with. And that was a little bit from the famous Freight Train. Okay, so that's this version. Then back to this guy. Some people make a distinction, just as an aside. They call this pinky and ring here, they call this a G5 chord. The reason for that is this note right here, the third fret on the B string on the second string, that's a D note, which you theory nerds will know is the fifth note in a G scale. So G chord with the fifth note added, G5. Okay? The advantage that this has, well, right off the bat, you can hear it, it's got a brighter sound than the other two ways of doing the G chord. You can hear that D note. I'm emphasizing that second string if you lift it off. So you get a different voicing of the chord. It has kind of a brighter, more assertive sound to it. And that's probably the reason that bluegrassers tend to like this chord, because it has that real ringy, bright sound that is very similar to the banjo. Because a banjo has that same note in that same place in the sound of it. Contemporary players like it particularly because by moving, just like we did this from G to C with these fingers, with the G5, by moving these two fingers, you get this really cool sounding chord, and we might talk more about it in a different place, but this is called a C2 or a C add 9. A lot of contemporary songs, a lot of folk songs use this to specifically have the sound of that. I first picked up on that the C2 chord from Noel Paul Stuckey's playing of one of his songs, Peter, Paul, and Mary. And then to get a little farther afield, discussing F chords. What is this? An F6 add 9. And it's the same shape just by moving these two fingers back and forth. G5, C2 or C add 9, or F6 9. And so there you have three different ways of three different shapes of G. They all have their advantages, they all have their disadvantages. So learn them all. Get comfortable with all of them so that while you're playing a song, as you go through the chord progression, you can plan ahead. You can think, okay, if I play this particular shape here and then this particular shape there, the flow of how your hand moves. I often use Where Have All the Flowers Gone as an example, and we'll start here with this original, I call it the Malbay G. Pivot to an E minor, pivot to a C, pivot to a D7, and then, oh look at that, those two are going to keep in the same shape from D7 to there. But then when we get to the part in the song where it goes from the D7 back to a C, then to a G, then we use this one back to the C. So you see how you can get this flow using the different shapes of G. And there you have it. Glad you were here. Tim Crosby. See you next time.